The wind howled like a wounded beast across the wide, open plains of Montana, dragging sharp snow across the asphalt like claws across glass. The highway was all but invisible beneath the swirl of white. A single set of tire tracks carved a shallow path through the growing drift, leading nowhere and everywhere at once. Emily Carter gripped the steering wheel with frozen fingers, squinting through the windshield as the wipers struggled to keep up. Her breath fogged the glass, and the heater had long surrendered to the cold. Her knuckles were white, her shoulders stiff, her lips trembled, not just from the cold, but from exhaustion. She shouldn't have taken the back road. The main highway might have added an hour, but at least someone might have passed by. This shortcut, winding through valleys and ridges, unfamiliar to her Denver eyes, now felt like a cruel dare. The snow had come down harder than forecasted. What was supposed to be a light afternoon flurry had turned into a whiteout before she made it past the town of Copper Ridge. And now the engine sputtered, a cough, a whine, then silence. "No, no, no," she whispered, her voice hoarse as she leaned forward, as if willing the engine back to life. She turned the key. Nothing. Again, just a hollow click. The dashboard lights flickered one last time, then gave up. She sat there, stunned for a moment. The temperature outside was dropping fast. Maybe 15 degrees now, maybe 10. Inside the car wasn't much better. She reached into the back seat for her coat, a thin hospital-issued windbreaker, barely enough to stop a breeze, let alone the kind of cold that came with Montana storms. Her hands were already numb. Emily had made it this far without breaking down. Not just the car, but herself. For the past year, she'd functioned like a machine. Wake, shower, drive, work, clean blood, hold hands, watch people die. Repeat. After Brian, she couldn't stay in that hospital, but she didn't want to feel anything either. So she said yes when her Aunt Martha invited her to visit for a few weeks. Some peace and space, Martha had promised. But peace, it turned out, was buried under 6 inches of snow and a broken ignition. She opened the door. The wind slammed it back against her. She braced herself and tried again, stepping into the snow. Her boots sank. The wind sliced across her cheeks. The road behind her was gone, just white. And then, lights. Far in the distance, flickering through the curtain of snow, warm golden light shimmered, blurred but steady, like barn lanterns or halogen lamps through old windows. A building. Shelter. She couldn't make out what kind, but it was big and low to the ground, likely wood. A barn? A ranch house? A store? High. She started walking, 1 foot, then the next. Every breath burned. Her hair stuck to her cheeks, wet from melted snow. Her legs ached as the wind shoved her sideways, but she kept going. The lights got closer. It was a barn. No, something more. A long, wide structure lit from within, filled with voices. As she stumbled nearer, she saw rows of parked trucks, snow-covered trailers, and the faint silhouettes of horses being led inside. A wooden sign swung violently from its hinges. Winter Ridge Livestock Auction and Rodeo Center. She nearly cried at the sight of it. The front doors opened suddenly as a man walked out, laughing with another, both carrying cowboy hats and thick coats. Heat and yellow light spilled onto the snow for a second before the doors closed again. She rushed forward, slipping once, catching herself on a fence post, then pushing toward the doors. Her legs ached. Her fingers didn't move anymore. She fumbled with the handle, finally wrenching the door open and stepping into a wave of sound and warmth. Inside, the world was loud and alive. People filled rows of bleachers lining a wooden arena floor. Voices boomed through speakers as an auctioneer called out bids in rapid rhythm. Horses stood proudly behind holding gates, sleek and muscular, their breath visible in the barn's still chilly air. The scent of hay and animal sweat filled her nose. No one noticed her. Not yet. She moved to the edge of the room, near the door, and sank to the floor beside a metal pillar. Her legs wouldn't hold her much longer. Her arms hugged her chest as she tucked her face down to her knees. All she needed was a few minutes of warmth. Then she'd figure something out. Maybe ask to borrow a phone. Maybe just rest. But someone noticed. Across the auction floor, Leaning near a support beam was a tall man in a long oilskin coat and dark denim jeans. He didn't speak much, not unless necessary. He didn't need to. His presence alone spoke louder than most men's voices. Wyatt Langston had seen 100 auctions, bought 1,000 head of cattle, knew every face in the room, and he knew when one didn't belong. A figure, slumped by the door, shaking, not drunk, not homeless, lost. His boots echoed across the concrete as he walked toward her. He slowed as he neared, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his black felt hat. She looked up just as he stepped into her light. Her face was red, eyes swollen, lips trembling. Her hands blue at the fingertips. "You all right, miss?" he asked, voice low but clear. She blinked, startled. My car. It died. I saw the lights. I just needed somewhere warm." Her voice cracked like dry ice. Wyatt looked her over quickly. She was shivering uncontrollably, barely dressed for the weather. He pulled his coat off in one swift motion and draped it over her shoulders before she could object. "You're freezing, come on." "I'm fine," she muttered. "You're not." He extended a gloved hand. "There's coffee and food in the back lounge. Heat too. Name's Wyatt. You can leave the moment you want, but you'll lose fingers if you step back out there." She stared at him. His eyes weren't threatening, just steady. Still, something in her hesitated, but the cold had drained her too much to argue. She took his hand. He helped her up gently, keeping a respectful distance. The coat swallowed her small frame, and her shoes squelched with half-melted snow. Wyatt guided her through the side corridor, past curious glances and a few whispered comments. Everyone knew Wyatt Langston. Nobody knew the woman in his coat. In the back, a wood-paneled lounge offered warmth, dim lamps and a coffee urn steaming beside a plate of wrapped sandwiches. He poured her a cup. No sugar, just strong, black, hot coffee. She wrapped her hands around the cup and exhaled shakily. "Thank you. You got a name?" he asked after a beat. "Emily." "All right, Emily. You got family around here?" "My aunt. She lives maybe 20 miles out. Red Hollow Road, I think. I was on my way to see her. I should have taken the highway." He gave a slow nod. "I know Red Hollow. Road gets nasty when it ices over. You're lucky you made it this far." She sipped the coffee and winced as the heat hit her lips. "I wasn't expecting it to hit so fast," the forecast said. "Forecasts lie," he interrupted softly, almost amused. "Especially out here." She looked up at him then, truly looked. He was older than she first thought, late 30s, maybe early 40s, but his face was weathered from sun and years of labor. Still, his eyes were calm. Not hard, just steady. "You some kind of rancher?" she asked. He smirked. "Something like that." They sat in silence for a while. Emily finished her coffee slowly, feeling the sensation return to her fingers. When she finally stood, he didn't pressure her. Just waited. "Listen," she said, glancing down at the coat still draped around her. "I don't want to be a burden. I just—" "You're not," he cut in. "Auction's over soon. I'll drive you to your aunt's. Or to a hotel if that's closer." She hesitated. "I don't want to interrupt anything." "You already did," he said, then softened his tone. "And I'm glad you did." She gave a small laugh. It was the first sound of lightness she'd made since stepping inside. "Okay," she said. Wyatt opened the barn doors as the last horse was led away, and snow began to settle again outside. The wind had eased, but the world was still buried in white. He walked to his truck, opened the passenger door for her, and waited. Emily looked at the cab, then at the man holding the door. This wasn't what she expected today. None of it was. But the truth was, she didn't know what to expect from anything anymore. She climbed in. He closed the door gently behind her, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so cold. The truck rumbled steadily across the snow-covered road, its tires carving paths through a world blanketed in silence. Emily sat beside Wyatt in the passenger seat, wrapped still in his coat, though the truck's heater now blew warm air over her chilled fingers. She stared out the window, watching pine trees blur by under a deepening gray sky, the last traces of light slipping below the ridges. The snow had lightened, falling in soft, scattered flakes, no longer angry, just present. Neither of them spoke for a long time. She kept catching the scent of the coat she wore, leather and pine smoke. It was worn but clean. Comfortable. It fit him, somehow, not just in size but in presence. Simple, functional, quiet. Everything about Wyatt Langston made her feel like she'd stepped into someone else's story. "You ever been out this way before?" he asked finally, his voice just loud enough over the hum of the tires. "Montana? No, I was born in Salt Lake, moved to Denver for school. I've traveled a little, but mostly cities. Big difference, I reckon." "You could say that." She adjusted the coat around her as the truck turned off the main road onto a gravel path, headlights bouncing slightly. "You've lived here your whole life?" "Close to it. Grew up about 30 miles west of here. My father ran a cattle operation. I took it over when I was 22. Bought this land about 10 years ago. Built it from scratch." She glanced at him. His eyes didn't leave the road, but there was something tight in his voice when he spoke of the past. He didn't elaborate. The truck crested a low hill, and below them stretched a vast clearing surrounded by pine trees. In the middle sat a ranch house, long, low, and wooden, its porch lit by 2 yellow lamps. To the left was a large barn, its roof dusted with snow. Faint plumes of smoke rose from a chimney behind the house, curling into the darkening sky. Wyatt slowed the truck and pulled up near the porch. Before she could open her door, he was already out, boots crunching on snow as he came around and opened it for her. "Welcome to Langston Ranch," he said simply. She stepped down, boots hitting solid earth for the first time in hours. The house looked old but well-maintained, with thick logs and heavy shutters, a stone step leading up to the door. No decorations, no potted plants, no wreaths, just honest, bare survival. "You can take the guest house," he said, nodding toward a smaller cabin to the side of the main building. "It's warm, got a shower, full bed, stove, everything you need. I'll leave you be, but if you need anything, I'm in the big house. Front porch light stays on." He handed her a small set of keys, tied together with a simple strip of leather. She hesitated. "You sure?" "I wouldn't offer if I wasn't." He turned and walked back toward the house without another word, the door creaking open behind him before swinging shut. Emily stood in the snow for a long moment, unsure how she felt. Grateful, certainly. Confused, absolutely. Little shaken by the strange sense of safety she felt in a place so far from anything she knew. The guest house door opened easily, and warmth hit her instantly. An old iron stove in the corner glowed red with slow-burning logs. A thick wool blanket rested at the foot of the bed. A small kitchenette sat to the right with a kettle on the counter and a pair of worn ceramic mugs. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, finally letting her weight drop. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off her soaked shoes, rubbing warmth back into her toes. The silence inside was total, but not empty. The kind of silence that invited thought, not loneliness. The next morning, light filtered through the frost-covered window, soft and golden. Emily woke with her legs curled under the blanket, surprised at how soundly she'd slept. Her body ached slightly, but her mind was clear for the first time in weeks. She stepped outside into crisp, dry air. The snow had stopped overnight, leaving a world pristine and untouched. The barn doors stood open, and the sound of animals stirred from within. She followed the path toward the house, pausing on the porch when she saw movement inside the barn. A horse neighed, and she caught sight of Wyatt leading a mare from her stall. He moved with quiet confidence, one hand steady on the rope, the other brushing the horse's flank. It was the kind of intimacy she only ever saw in emergency rooms between dying patients and the nurses who knew them best. Silent, earned. He noticed her and gave a small nod. "Morning. I hope I'm not interrupting. You hungry?" She nodded, and he led her inside. The house was warmer than she expected, furnished modestly but with care. A small table near the kitchen window, a wood stove in the corner, leather chairs arranged around a hearth. It smelled like coffee and ash and something sweet. He handed her a mug. "You cook?" she asked, sipping. "Enough to survive." She looked around at the neatness, the order. "Do you live alone?" He nodded. "And the ranch? You run it yourself?" "I have a crew during the season. Just me and Hank during winter." "Who's Hank?" As if on cue, the back door opened with a thud, and a man in a thick jacket limped inside, brushing snow from his beard. He paused, surprised to see her, then gave Wyatt a pointed look. "This her?" he asked, not rudely. "This is Emily. She's staying a day or two. Car trouble." Hank smiled, tipped his head. "Welcome to nowhere," she laughed. "I've been to worse places. Most folks don't pass through here unless they're lost." Wyatt poured him coffee without a word. By mid-morning, she'd offered to help clean up around the guest house, but Wyatt waved her off. Instead, she wandered toward the barn, drawn by the sound of hoofbeats and the scent of hay. Inside, she found a small crisis unfolding. Hank was seated on a bale, his leg twisted at an awkward angle, face pale. A horse stood nervously nearby. "I slipped on the ice trying to check her shoes," he muttered. "Damn thing spooked." Emily dropped to her knees beside him. "I'm a nurse." "I'm fine," he lied. "Not with that ankle, you're not." She removed his boot gently, examined the swelling, and asked Wyatt for ice. Within minutes, she had Hank stabilized, leg elevated on a grain sack, pulse steady. She wrapped it with gauze and improvised a sling from a saddle strap. Wyatt watched in silence, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "You're good at that," he said after Hank was resting. "I've done worse." The sun crept higher as the day stretched on. She helped clean the stall where the horse had panicked, brushing the mare slowly as she calmed. Her hands, once shaking from cold and grief, moved now with steady care. Later that evening, Wyatt knocked on the door of her guest house with a covered dish. "Venison stew," he said. She took it with a smile. "Smells amazing." He lingered for a moment, then turned to go. "Wyatt," she said. He stopped. "Thank you for not asking questions." He looked back. "Everyone's carrying something. Some folks just don't talk about it." She nodded, understanding more than she expected. The next few days passed in rhythm. She stayed longer than intended, partially from the snow, partially because something in her hesitated to leave. They spoke more. Small things, past stories, strange habits. She learned he read history books at night and carved small animals from cedar. He learned she'd lost someone too. It wasn't spoken, not yet, but it was there. On the third night, as snowflakes returned like whispers on the window glass, she sat by the stove with a mug of tea and watched his shadow pass the guest house window, headed back to the barn. She didn't know yet what this place was doing to her, but something inside her heart was beginning to stir. Not loud, just steady. The sky stretched wide above the Langston ranch, pale blue and streaked with golden light as winter began its slow retreat. Days were longer now. Snow still lined the hillsides and shaded fence posts, but warmth had returned to the air. The land no longer felt frozen in time. It felt like it was waking up. Emily Carter walked the pasture trail with her coat open, hands tucked into the pockets of her jeans. Horses watched her as she passed, their breath rising in the morning light. She gave a quiet nod to the chestnut mare she'd helped calm just days ago, her fingers still remembering the feel of its warm neck and twitching muscles. It had been a week, a full week since she'd stumbled, half frozen, into Wyatt Langston's life. She wasn't sure when she'd stopped looking at the calendar, stopped counting the days until she left. But she had. Martha had called, grateful to hear Emily was safe, and not at all surprised when she said she might be staying longer. "There's healing out there," her aunt had said, "not just in the mountains. In people, too." Emily wasn't sure if she believed that. But she wanted to. She found Wyatt in the east paddock, leaning against the fence rail with a coil of rope in one hand and a clipboard in the other. He looked over his shoulder as she approached. "Sleep okay?" She nodded. "Didn't even hear the wind last night." He handed her the clipboard. "You're hired." She laughed, eyes scanning the notes. Feed rotations, hoof checks, a few vet appointments. Her name was penciled at the top. "So I'm staff now?" "Volunteer, no benefits. Free coffee, though." "I'll take it," she said, and followed him along the fence line. They walked in silence for a while. It had become a pattern with them. Words used sparingly, never wasted. When they did speak, it meant something. The comfort of that was new to her. She wasn't used to silence meaning peace. Later that afternoon, Wyatt told her about the upcoming town event, a small barn dance and charity auction being hosted just outside of Copper Ridge. Emily had been folding blankets near the tack room when he mentioned it, his tone as casual as if asking if she wanted more salt in her stew. "I don't usually go," he admitted. "Too many people. But Hank said I ought to make an appearance this year. Show we're still part of the town." "You're a legend, right?" she teased. "Can't let them forget you exist." He smirked, eyes amused. "Something like that." She hesitated, fingers pausing over the edge of a folded blanket. "Are you inviting me?" "I'm saying you're welcome to ride along if you're curious," he said without pressure. She stared at him, the quiet man who gave her warmth and space and never asked for anything back. "All right," she said softly. "I'll come." That night, she stood in front of the mirror in the guest house and studied herself. She hadn't worn makeup since Denver, and barely recognized her own face without the hospital lighting and tired eyes. She brushed out her hair, tied it back simply, then pulled on a pair of borrowed boots and an old flannel shirt Wyatt had left on the porch for her earlier that day. It smelled faintly of cedar and soap. She felt like someone else. Not the nurse who ran from grief, not the fiancé who buried her future under ash. Just a woman on a ranch, with somewhere to go and someone waiting. The town hall was lit by strings of soft bulbs and the glow of old lanterns. A band played gentle bluegrass in the corner, and children ran laughing between hay bales stacked near the dance floor. Inside, familiar faces gathered around food tables and auction displays, ranchers, teachers, mechanics, store clerks. It was a town, alive with the kind of heartbeat only shared roots can bring. Wyatt stood beside her near the door, his hat tilted back slightly, clean shirt tucked neat into his jeans. He looked like every Western novel ever written, except quieter, stronger for the silence. "Big crowd," she said. He glanced around. "You okay?" She nodded. "Just trying to remember the last time I heard music that wasn't through a hospital speaker." "Come on," he said, leading her toward the floor. They stood together for a while, listening, sipping from paper cups. People approached Wyatt with nods and handshakes, each interaction short but warm. A few glanced at Emily with curiosity, but no one asked. No one needed to. The woman in his coat, the nurse with soft eyes. They'd already decided who she was. Then the music changed. A slower song, gentle fiddle and warm guitar. Wyatt turned to her. "You dance?" She looked at him, uncertain. "I used to." "Want to try?" He held out a hand. She took it. They moved together into the rhythm, feet slow, her hand in his. It wasn't perfect. His boots nearly stepped on her toes twice, and she laughed, surprised by how easy it was to laugh again. He smiled too, rare and real. Around them, the town danced. Children fell into hay. Laughter echoed. And in the center, under hanging lights, Emily felt something loosen inside her. A knot untied. A breath released. When the song ended, she pulled away gently, not because she wanted to stop, but because it was too much, too fast. Wyatt stepped back, giving her space. "I'll be right outside," she whispered, and walked into the night. The cool air hit her face like a splash of water. She stood near the hitching post, staring out over the fields where the moonlight touched the snow like silver. She didn't hear him approach, but she knew it was him. "I'm sorry," she said before he could speak. "For what? I thought I was ready for this, for a moment like that. But I'm not. Not yet." He stood beside her, not touching, just there. "You don't have to be." She turned toward him. "You're being kind." "I'm being honest," he said. "You don't owe me anything. We danced, that's all." "But it wasn't just a dance," she said softly. "Not for me." He looked at her, steady again. Always steady. "No," he said. "Not for me either." She wanted to say more. Something real. Something brave. But the words tangled in her throat, and all she could do was nod. They didn't go back inside. They stood there, in the cold, shoulder to shoulder, watching the horizon. The next morning, Emily packed a small bag. She didn't plan to leave, not permanently, but she needed air. Distance, a day to remember who she was. She found Wyatt in the barn, brushing down one of the mares. "I'm going to visit my aunt," she said. "Spend the night, maybe 2. He paused, hands still on the brush. "You all right?" "I think I just need time." "To think." He nodded slowly. "Take my truck," he said. "Yours is still dead." She reached out and squeezed his arm gently. "Thank you." He didn't stop her, didn't ask her to stay. Just watched as she drove away down the snowy road, his coat still folded on the passenger seat beside her. The fields blurred past her window. The mountains rose in the distance. Her heart beat heavy with something she didn't yet have a name for. Not love. Not yet, but not nothing either. At her aunt's cabin, Martha welcomed her with open arms and warm food, as if she'd been expecting her. They talked late into the night. About Brian. About the fire. About everything Emily had buried so deep she'd forgotten it was still there. In the quiet, Martha said, "You don't heal by forgetting. You heal by remembering that you're still allowed to feel joy again." Emily stared at the firelight, the words echoing deep. She returned 2 days later. The snow had melted slightly, and muddy patches dotted the trail. As she pulled up the long road to the ranch, her breath caught. Wyatt stood on the porch, one hand resting on the post, watching her. She stepped out slowly, uncertain what to say. He spoke first. "Glad you came back." Her throat tightened. "I wasn't sure I would." "But you did." They stood there, neither moving. Then, quietly, he said, "Next time you walk away, I'd like to know if I should wait." She looked at him. "Always wait," she whispered. And he did. Spring arrived quietly in Montana, not with sudden bursts of green or birdsong, but with a slow retreat of the snow, a gentle loosening of the ground. The frozen breath of winter melted into cold, wet mornings and sun that lasted longer with each passing day. On the Langston ranch, the fields began to reveal tufts of brown grass, and the wind carried with it the scent of pine and damp earth. Emily Carter had been back for nearly a week, not as a guest, not as a woman hiding from her grief, but as someone who belonged, if not to the land, then at least to the rhythm of it. She'd slipped easily into the daily routines of the ranch, morning feedings, late-night checks on foaling mares, even paperwork when Wyatt let her near his precious ledgers. She moved between the barn and the guest house with a natural grace, her boots worn in now, her eyes steadier. But something inside her still resisted. There was a limit she couldn't cross, a hesitation in her heart that whispered doubt whenever she looked too long at Wyatt, or when silence fell between them and it felt like something was waiting to be said. He didn't press her, never had. That made it harder. Because part of her wanted him to. It was Hank who broke the pattern. She found him on the porch one evening, his leg propped up and a mug of coffee in hand. He watched the horizon, as if it held the answer to a question he hadn't asked yet. "You ever gonna stop circling that man like a skittish horse?" he asked without looking at her. Emily sat down beside him, pulling her coat tighter. "I'm not circling," she said. "You're not going forward either." She stared out at the field, where Wyatt was helping a young ranch hand mend a section of fencing. The boy laughed at something Wyatt said, and the sound drifted up toward them. "I don't want to mess it up," she said finally. "You think he doesn't feel the same?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Hank shifted in his chair, wincing slightly. "I've known Wyatt since he was 16. Tougher than he looks. But That man's been lonely a long time. Built fences around his heart taller than the ones you see out there. You're the first person I've seen him let inside without trying to control it. Don't waste that." She looked down at her hands. "I lost someone, Hank. A year ago. My fiancé. He died in a fire. At the hospital. He was a surgeon. We were both working that night. I couldn't get to him." Hank didn't respond. He just let the weight of her words settle like dust on the boards beneath their feet. He was brave, kind, everything I thought I needed, and losing him, I shut everything down. Moved through the world like it didn't have color anymore, but now, out here, with Wyatt. "It's starting to come back," Hank said gently. She nodded. "Well," he said after a pause, "you don't have to decide today. But you damn well better not leave without saying what's in your heart." That night, Wyatt knocked on her door just after dinner. He held a folded piece of paper in one hand. "I wanted you to see this." She took it and unfolded it slowly. A flyer. Thick cardstock printed in warm colors. At the top, Spring Livestock Gala and Charity Dinner, celebrating Montana's ranching legacy. "Annual event in Copper Ridge," he said. "I usually skip it. Too much talking, not enough purpose. But this year they asked me to give a speech. And they want a donation, a big one." She looked up at him. "You're going?" He nodded. "Figure it's time. And you want me to come?" "I'd like you there," he said simply. She hesitated, then smiled. "Then I'll be there." The night of the gala arrived like a breath held too long. The town hall had been transformed, the walls draped with fabric, tables set with candles and white linen. The townsfolk looked different somehow, cleaned up, polished, but still real. Ranchers in sport coats, their wives in denim dresses and turquoise jewelry. Kids ran between tables, and the scent of roasted meat and fresh bread filled the room. Wyatt stood near the back, his broad shoulders straight, his black coat tailored and crisp. Emily approached slowly, her hair curled loosely, her dress simple but elegant. A deep forest green that made her eyes stand out. For a long second, he just looked at her. "You look," he started, then stopped, the word failing him. She smiled. "You clean up all right yourself." They moved through the room together, side by side, fielding nods and greetings. The townspeople were curious but respectful. A few offered knowing glances. Most just smiled. When the dinner began, they sat near the front, close to the stage. The food was good, the wine better, but Emily barely tasted any of it. Wyatt was quiet, not withdrawn, just focused, as if something was weighing on him. When his name was called, he stood without hesitation and walked up to the microphone. The room fell silent. "Evening," he said, voice steady. "I'm Wyatt Langston. Some of you know me, some don't. That's all right." A few chuckles rippled through the room. "I was asked to speak about legacy, about what it means to carry on a name, a land, a business. And I guess I've done some of that. I've raised cattle, bought property, built something out of dust and stubbornness, and I've done it alone mostly." He paused. "But tonight I want to talk about something else. Something I didn't expect to find again. I want to talk about how a snowstorm blew into my life and dropped off a woman on my doorstep who reminded me what it meant to feel." Emily's heart stopped. "I didn't ask for her. I didn't need saving. But she came anyway. And she made me remember that legacy isn't just land. It's the lives we touch, the people we care for, the ones who show up when everything's cold and quiet and tell you it doesn't have to be." He looked straight at her. "I came here tonight to give money, but what I found was worth more than any dollar I've ever earned." The room was silent, still. Then, slowly, applause broke out. It grew, rising and swelling, until the hall filled with sound. Emily stood. She couldn't sit, couldn't breathe. She stepped out into the hallway, her pulse racing, heart hammering. She needed space, air. But it found her first. Wyatt followed. Not fast, just steady. She turned when she heard his boots on the floor. "That wasn't just a speech," she said. "No," he said, "it wasn't. I didn't ask for this, Wyatt. I wasn't ready for this." "I know." She looked up at him, tears brimming. "I'm still scared." "So am I." They stood there, two people who'd been broken by the world and were slowly, stubbornly putting themselves back together. Then he said it. "I'm not afraid to lose everything I've built, but I'm terrified of losing you." She stepped forward, close, closer. "You're not going to," she whispered, and then she kissed him. It wasn't fireworks or thunder. It was warmth. Steady. Earned. A kiss that said, "We're still here. We survived. And we're ready now." Later that night, back at the ranch, they sat on the porch beneath the stars. Neither spoke much. Words weren't needed. Inside, the fireplace crackled. Outside, the snow began to fall again. But this time, it wasn't a storm. It was just the sky remembering how to be soft. Dawn crept slowly over the hills, casting a golden wash across the land that seemed to shimmer where the snow had finally receded. The frost was gone now, leaving behind muddy trails, thawed soil, and early buds pushing out of the sleeping ground. On the Langston ranch, spring didn't arrive with loud color or loud declarations. It arrived the same way Wyatt did, with quiet purpose and a strength that asked for no attention but couldn't be ignored. Emily stood barefoot on the wooden porch of the guest house, a steaming mug in her hand, her hair loose and wind-touched. The hem of her flannel shirt danced just above her knees, borrowed from Wyatt's closet, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her body was warm, her mind calm. She watched a bluebird land on the fence post, chest puffed, wings twitching. It sang into the breeze without care if anyone listened. The door creaked behind her. She didn't turn. She knew the rhythm of those footsteps now, the slow, booted thud of a man who carried both weight and peace in his walk. Wyatt stood beside her, coffee in hand, shoulder brushing hers. His face hadn't fully woken yet, and there was something comforting in seeing the strongest man she knew still half lost in morning softness. They stood there for a long time, watching the land stretch and breathe beneath them. "I've been thinking," he said finally. "That's dangerous," she replied. He gave her a look, a slow, sideways grin forming. "Don't make me regret last night." "You didn't regret last night." "No," he said quietly, "not even for a second." She leaned into him then, her head resting against his arm, and they stayed like that while the sun rose higher. Later, as they walked the property together, Wyatt explained his plans for the barn. A section of the north stall would be cleared, cleaned, and renovated. "For what?" she asked, glancing at the dust-covered storage crates. "A clinic," she stopped. "What?" "You said once that this place could use care, said people out here don't get enough of it." "I did." "Well," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "you were right." She stared at him, blinking slowly. "You're building a clinic on the ranch. Doesn't have to be big. Doesn't have to be fancy. But you've got a gift, Emily, and I figure if you're willing to stay, might as well let you change some lives while you're here." She felt it rise then, something deep and steady. Love, full and whole and not running from anything anymore. It didn't start in her chest. It started lower, in her gut, her hands, her skin. The parts of her that remembered what it felt like to be human before fear made her forget. "Are you asking me to stay?" she whispered. "I think I've been asking since the day I handed you that coffee in the auction barn," he said. She nodded once. Then yes. The following weeks moved like a tide, steadily and with purpose. Wyatt called in contractors he trusted. Emily made lists, examined supplies, reached out to Martha's network of retired nurses and traveling doctors. Word spread quickly through Copper Ridge. A clinic at the Langston Ranch. Not just first aid for ranch hands and livestock wounds, but something real. Preventative care. Basic diagnostics. A place for mothers too tired to drive into town. For kids with bruised arms and fathers too proud to admit they'd slipped in the snow. The ranch became more than land. It became a promise. On one particularly warm afternoon, Wyatt handed Emily a small box at breakfast. No ribbon, no fanfare. She opened it slowly, expecting something familiar. A necklace, a bracelet, but inside was a key. "What's this to?" she asked. He pointed out the window. "The main house." Her throat tightened. "I thought, you don't have to live in that guest house unless you want to. But this is your home now, too, if you'll have it." She wrapped her fingers around the key, held it to her chest. "I'll have it." They moved in together without ceremony. One day she was waking up with birdsong in the guest house, and the next she was wrapped in Wyatt's arms in his bed, the windows open, the curtains dancing. The transition didn't need words. It was felt in the way he left her coffee exactly how she liked it, and how she kept his books stacked by the fire just the way he placed them. It was in how they lived, not how they announced it. Months passed. The clinic opened on a clear June morning, marked not by a ribbon but by a door propped open, and a small wooden sign hand-carved by Wyatt himself. Langston Family Wellness. The name surprised her. She hadn't expected him to include the word family. "You're part of it," he said simply, as if it had always been that way. That summer brought life in all its fullness. Children ran barefoot through the barnyard. Wyatt's brother Roger returned after 10 years estranged, drawn back by the news that the land was alive again. Their first conversation was tense. Long pauses. Unsure eyes. But Emily had watched enough people try to patch broken things to know when the glue would hold. It held. Roger didn't come back to take over. He came back to support, to mend. Wyatt never said the words, "I forgive you," but when he handed Roger the ledger to help balance feed supply costs, it was louder than any apology ever could be. By late summer, Emily's name was spoken with a kind of reverence by the local kids. She patched knees, gave lollipops, taught a few CPR basics. Some of the older ranch hands called her Doc Carter, half joking, half respectful. Wyatt smiled every time he heard it. And through it all, their love deepened, not in grand gestures or public declarations, but in late-night porch talks, the way he brought her wildflowers from the ridge, the way she rubbed his shoulders when he came home sore and silent. One evening, as the sky burned orange over the pastures, Emily found a small carved bird resting on the windowsill above the sink. Its wings were spread, beak open, in mid-song. She picked it up gently and turned it in her hands. Underneath, etched in Wyatt's handwriting, were 3 words. "You came back." She pressed it to her chest and didn't cry. Not because she didn't feel it, but because there was no pain left. Only gratitude. Later that fall, a writer from a regional magazine came by. They'd heard about the clinic, about the ranch that wasn't just a business, but a sanctuary. Emily and Wyatt gave the interview together, seated on the porch swing, her hand resting on his knee. They told the story not of a millionaire and a nurse, but of a man who built walls and a woman who helped him open the doors again. The article ran in October, with a photo of the 2 of them in front of the barn, dogs at their feet, laughter frozen in the moment. The title read, "A Storm, a Stranger, and a Second Chance, The Langston Ranch Legacy." But Emily never liked that title. Because this wasn't a second chance. It was the first one that had ever truly mattered. She stood by the fence one cold evening, wind tugging at her jacket, eyes on the mountains. Behind her, the house glowed with light. Inside, Wyatt was making dinner. Roger and Hank were setting up shelves in the storage shed. A child's bike leaned against the porch. And the sound of soft laughter rose from the clinic's back room, where Martha was reading to a little boy while his mother filled out intake forms. Emily had come here cold, tired, ready to disappear. Now she stood warm, strong, full of stories that hadn't been written yet. And as the stars began to show through the darkening sky, she smiled, not because the story was over, but because it never would be. In the quiet fields of Montana, where storms once carved silence into hearts, love found its way not with thunder, but with warmth. Wyatt and Emily didn't fall in love. They built it, day by day, out of trust, healing, and second chances. And on that ranch, beneath open skies and steady hands, they proved that sometimes the greatest legacies aren't made of land or wealth, but of the people we choose to hold close and never let go. If this story touched your heart, imagine what other tales are waiting just beyond the horizon. Subscribe now to Wild West Love Chronicles and saddle up for more unforgettable journeys of love, loss, and redemption under the wide open skies. Don't miss the next story that might just stay with you forever.